We're at time, Rabbi.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
For this, and I believe that Julia is going to sing us in today with the same text. Julia, am I correct? The same text we used yesterday.
Yeah,
right?
well, for the beginning, let's keep it as a nigun, and then we'll go to the text. Yeah, but we'll do the same, we'll pick up. Oop.
So I'm not sharing anything, correct?
Right, yeah, we'll pick up where we were with Cantor Niemi yesterday.
Okay. Take it away. You're muted.
Oh, we're just doing the nigun, yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I think it's a nice idea to stick with that one while we're in this psalm, since these words are the words of that song are from the psalm. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody. Good morning. Today is Thursday, I believe, right? And so today is the last day we're studying this week, and we will start again next week. And I would recommend, if people aren't have a practice for doing anything about the Psalms the rest of the day, to try and commit yourself to 15 minutes beyond the class to study the Psalm, or to read about it online, or to read a follow-up article. Try and commit to 15 minutes beyond the class sometime during the day and see how that deepens your experience of the Psalms as we go through. So what we're going to look at today are comparing some of the translations that we have. And again, we're going to mostly be sticking with, we're using the Sepharia translation, which Harold has been putting up online. We're using the Alter translation, which is this book by Robert Alter, which I highly recommend because it has Alter's great explanations of his translations, and he has all 150 in them. We're going to be looking at Norman Fisher, who is a Zen Buddhist, and we're going to look at that as the final translation for today if we get to it. But he doesn't do all of the Psalms, so we won't be looking at this book for all of the Psalms because he simply hasn't done all 150. The same thing is true with Stephen Mitchell. We'll be looking, for instance, he did not do Psalm 3, so we're not going to be looking at his translation today of Psalm 3. But when he does do a translation, you can see it's a pretty skinny book. So there's not that many Psalms but I was corrected before, and let me be more careful. Is adaptations, interpretations, as he said, selected and adapted from the Hebrew. So there are not so many, but we will when he has done one. Stephen Mitchell is a poet, so it's very interesting to see what he's done as a poet. And then the final one that we'll be using, and sometimes we'll be looking at, this is I've pointed this out, I use this one all the time as my basic where I start, because it's interlinear. So if you can see, it has every Psalm in the Hebrew and the English. Alter does not include the Hebrew in his book because he wanted to keep it to be a manageable size. But this book is only the Hebrew and the English and very little commentary, so they can fit all 150. You can see everybody's facing that question, you know, how do you do this without? And then the final book, which we'll be looking at sometimes for translations, not always, depending on which the Psalm is this 2-volume set by Richard Levy, Rabbi Richard Levy, and it's published by the Reform Movement. And he has a very beautiful introductory essay. And after each Psalm, he writes, as a rabbi, what are some of his spiritual reflections on the Psalm. You don't have to get these books. Harold and I and Sasha are working on, we'll distribute the various Psalms when we get to them. But if anybody wants some of them, that's what we're going to be working with. And normally I'll just refer to them by the author's last name. I want to just remind everybody and warn us as we're about to go into these various interpretations, no one interpretation is the right one, and we're looking for what's wrong or right. What we're looking for is what is the author, what is the writer, two things, and this is traditional study with commentaries. What are the problematic pieces of the text that the commentator or the interpreter or the translator is grappling with? What are the problematic pieces? And then two, what is the overall message that this author wants to take from this psalm? And as you can see from those two questions, there is not going to be a single right or wrong answer. And the reason I always start with you with going through the basic Hebrew text is that you're going to start to get familiar in the basic translation with those problematic questions, so that we're going to then now look at how did different people respond to those problematic tensions presented by the text. And then second, how does each author respond spiritually, personally to this psalm? What do they take away from it? What's their takeaway, so to speak? That's why when we prepare to write our own, those two things, you're going to have to grapple, as you saw in Psalm 1 and 2. There's some problems in the text. It's not clear how to approach a word or a couple of words or a sentence, or even remember in the Psalm 2, we couldn't figure out who was speaking when and to whom. That's an example of something problematic that, and you might look back at the traditional rabbinic commentators and they might have a resolution, but it's not the resolution. Okay, so let's look. We're going to start with Robert Alter. This is Robert Alter, very famous person and scholar. And remember, he sees as his task in approaching biblical poetry and biblical translation to find a way to bring out in the English something of the structure or the alliteration or the something that was in the biblical Hebrew that an English reader without knowing biblical Hebrew would not necessarily get. He's not interested in a new understanding in the sense that, like Norman Fisher, throws out structure. He just wants to get to what is the spiritual meaning for him. Alter wants to try and stay as close as he can to what he thinks the biblical Hebrew is doing. So that's why looking on this page, he will take, remember, parallelism, hugely important word. I want to make sure every single person in the class understands when I use the word parallelism. In biblical Hebrew, it means there are two parts of every verse. Once in a while, there are three, but in this psalm, it's two, so we'll stick to, there's actually a third. But parallelism means in every line in which there are two basic clauses or phrases. Is the microphone better today, by the way? I heard it was blocking me.
Yes.
And does the sound better today? Sound good? I got a new thing. I got so many gadgets. This is an anti-pop screen.
Yes.
So it should help that you don't hear the stuff. Okay, so, all right. So Alter will show in the structure of his translation the parallelism, that each sentence, each verse has two parts that we have to identify by where the etnach or the etnachta is. And there are different purposes for the the parallel phrases. Sometimes it's simply a restating in different words, the same meaning. Sometimes it's antithetical, it's a contrast. And sometimes it's an escalation, or it's some kind of increase in the meaning, or an escalated meaning, or somehow some development, some movement. So everybody gets that. Let's look. There are three usually. There are others too, but again, we're trying to just develop our vocabulary for looking at the Psalms together. So one is that it's just repeating it in different words. Two is that it's making the reverse statement. And three, it's somehow escalating or explicating or creating a development of ideas from the first to the second. Is that clear to everybody? Let me just stop there to make sure parallelism, biblical poetic parallelism, if you have questions about that concept. And Harold, I can't see.
No questions, no hand.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll point this out as we go through this psalm, and again, you'll hear it over and over again. Do I have the right glasses? Yes, I have the right glasses. Okay, so I'm going to hold open the Hebrew also. This is the one thing I don't like about the altar is that you have to, in order to get to the Hebrew, you have to have another book open. And
I apologize. I can't put up both on the screen.
No, I know.
Everyone who has it at home or who can print out their Safari sheet can do that.
I'll make some points and I'll go through. And this is, again, but I understand why he did it. The book would obviously have been double the size. But for me, it's a little frustrating just because I like to go back to the Hebrew. So we pointed this out, and I'm going to show you this again. He does not like the idea of translating Mizmor LeDavid as a Psalm of David's. He thinks that it too much emphasizes the resolution of the question of who authored these Psalms. To say a Psalm of David makes people think these Psalms were all written by David, and Alter absolutely doesn't believe that, and he doesn't think Mizmor Le, the Lamed, pronounced as an American would pronounce the Lamed. That's a very hard consonant for American Jews to say. Mizmor LeDavid, he said, it's just not correct to translate it as for. That, and you see at the below the line is his commentary. It's a little too small for me to read, but if people can.
Whoops. Yeah, it's here.
Yeah, that's, can we read it? It's too small for me to read. Actually, I can read it from my altar. So this is an example of what I would say is, how do you resolve this problematic issue of the problematic issue is, how do you translate Mizmor LeDavid? And part of the issue is that so many of us have heard the phrase a Psalm of David for so long that we assume that that's what it means. We don't even question it. And the strength of Alter is that he's going back to the Hebrew and saying, hold on, just because that's been the traditional English rendition, let's not accept that. So I'm going to read out what Alter says just about a David Psalm. The traditional rendering is a Psalm of David, which tends to imply authorship. The Hebrew preposition le is ambiguous. It could mean of or by, or it often means belonging to. Another common meaning is for, or it might refer to something as loose as in the manner of. The choice of translation is intended to preserve these ambiguous possibilities. When he fled, now in the Hebrew, it's, let me just get back to the Hebrew. We saw that there's when he fled is Bivracho mipnei Avshalom, his son. When he fled from Absalom, his son. The next line, remember we have the Yud He Vav He. So Alter preserves the four-letter big name of God, Hashem, as being all in uppercase. What do you call that when it's small?
Small caps.
Small caps. So whenever the word Lord is used and spelled with those small caps, that's a convention that's existed long before Alter. I think it might, is that the St. James Bible?
I think King James Bible 16.
Yeah, so he's preserving that translation technique to make sure you know which name of God is being used. How many are my foes? Ma rabu tsarai. How many are my foes? Rabim kamim alai. Many, comma, and you notice what he's done here is by using the same word many. If he were writing an English poem, he would not use many twice in one verse. That's just, we don't do that. We like using different vocabulary, but by repeating the word many, he's emphasizing what I said before, that we are supposed to hear in the English the same root being used, and the repetition has a bit of a poetic rhythm to it. Lord, how many are my foes? Many, comma, who rise up against me. And that's kamim alai. Gimel, many, again, rabim, the same word, rabim is being used. And again, he's using the exact same English word to keep this repetition, our hearing it. So remember, just think of, so now we can hear a little bit in the English, the rhythm of the, or it's all kind of like a metronome of the many, right? So, Lord, how many are my foes? Many who rise up against me, many who say of my life. There's a sense of, a beat there that feels oppressive. Many, who say of my life, Omrim lenafshi, and remember we talked about what does nefesh mean, and here he's choosing to translate what our simple kind of modern ears would hear as soul. He's using the word life to indicate this is not just about a soul, which is a very contemporary idea, but about the whole being, life. Ein Yeshuata lo, be Elohim Selah. There is no, and remember in Christians will always translate the word Yeshua with some salvific word, something about salvation, because the word on salvation is the most important word for Christian theology, because Jesus represents the ability to be saved. But for Jews, you'll see Yeshua being translated in all different kinds of ways, because it means some version of, he's using the translation rescue, which I like actually. Rescue, redemption, save is okay for Jews too, but it won't be the only word you'll see. No rescue for him through God. Selah. So who's saying this? The bad people, so to speak. My enemies are saying there's no rescue for him, even through God, so to speak. There, right? Next, Selah, verse 4. And you, comma, Lord. And how do we know what the Hebrew is for Lord? That lowercase, upper, what did you call it? Uppercase?
Small caps.
Small caps. Thank you. I can't remember that. Small caps. Now here we come to the word that we talked about, meaning defense or shield. So he's using the word shield. Magen are for me, my glory. Kvodi umerim roshi, who lifts up my head. Now, look at this. So you see the parallelism is super clear in the way that Alter has divided up those sentences. So if you weren't sure what the divisions were, traditionally Alter shows you. And he's also making clear by adding those quotation marks, which don't exist in the Hebrew, of course, what the quote is. And then we go back, so we always can tell in Alter who Alter believes is the speaker, right? So you can see where Alter is very clear who he believes the speaker. Now, why is the W in who capitalized? Alter will always be very careful about this, because the who is referring back to Alter's Lord, the Yud He Vav He. So my glory, kvodi, he's putting in a comma after the first word kvodi, umerim roshi, and the one who lifts up my head, which in Hebrew is absolutely correct. To say merim, you can, to say the one who is doing this action, Hebrew is very efficient with its verbs, English, but he's adding this by emphasizing that. We're going to just run through this and then we'll open it up for questions. Hey, with my voice, and remember the Hebrew here was just koli, el Hashem ekra va'aneni. So with my voice, and there's no preposition there, so he is adding that to give the emphasis, because otherwise it would just say my voice to God, I call. That would be the literal word by word translation. He's switching I cry, because as I said, he wants the English readers to understand what would be a normal sentence. In Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, it's normal to say, El Adonai Ekrad, which in English would sound like to God I call. Doesn't sound like a normal English sentence. We would say that if we wanted to emphasize that, but he's pointing out that this particular sentence in Hebrew is a very normal, so with my voice, I cry out to God. Va'aneni, and he answers, again, the capitalized H, meaning the Lord. Answers mehar, from his, capital H, holy mountain, kodsho, Selah. Now you notice how where he prints the Selah, again, it emphasizes that he believes the word Selah is not a part of the verse itself, but it's some kind of marking. Some people think, by the way, it might be a musical marking. Some people think it might be a rhythm marking. It is really not totally understood. What does he say there about it, Selah? He has a comment about Selah. Though there is general agreement that this is a choral, oh wow, look at that this is a choral or musical notation, there is no way of determining the meaning or the etymology. So we don't really know, and by him putting it the way he has placed it, which is a decision on his part, he's no right or wrong, he's making it clear. It's like if you're the singer or the musician playing this piece, somehow you would know that Sela meant something. Maybe it was about, the rhythm, or I don't know, but we don't know. But it's so he is printing this. You'll see in other translations that don't take Sela out of the sentence. In my the Mitsuda, this one, it puts Sela in italics to indicate it's somehow not part of the words of the psalm exactly. It's something else. The author doesn't know what the something else is. It might be like an amen, but we don't really know. Okay, so going on with the altar reading. Just a second, getting back to the Hebrew. So Vav, I lie down, Ani shachavti ve'ishana, and I sleep. And then the second half of the psalm, and he answered, I awake for the Lord has sustained me. So you see the parallelism there. In this case, it's one of those that I talked about as being escalating or explicating or some development in the idea. It's not exactly a repetition. Same thing with the verse above. I fear not from myriads of troops. And that's a translation of the psalm, the sentences that we just sang that Julia and Jacob Nimi led us in yesterday. Lo ira, I won't fear. Merivivot, which is many or multitudes, or here is translated as myriads of troops that round and set against me. Asher saviv shatu alai. And then in 8, rise, Lord, Yud He Vav He. And the exclamation mark, which does seem to represent that psik that Jacob Nimi talked about yesterday, the line that makes this an extra pause. Rescue me. Again, back to the word rescue instead of savior, the same word that we saw rescue in verse 3. Now this is the first triad verse we have, where instead of parallelisms of 2 clauses or phrases, we have 3. And see so the first one is rescue me, O God. And the second 2 are all about what you should do to the people who are out to get me. And then 9, rescue, that word again. So by reading this translation, we see that the word rescue appears 3 times in the psalm. And it does, if you look back at the Hebrew. By not translating that word differently, even though it's in different forms throughout the Hebrew, you can see that there is a theme that a Hebrew reader would hear, but an English reader would not if we used a different way to translate rescue all the time. And this is an example of something or maybe it's 4 times, 3 or 4 times. This is an example of what's very important to alter, that you see in the English things that you would see in the Hebrew if you understood those forms and structures. So again, verse line, rescue is the Lord's, on your people, your blessing. Okay, any questions about that one? And then we're going to quickly go to
Marcia had if you can unmute yourself. Marcia had a question. Let's go to the question you had about the tenses. You say the verse 6 translation, first clause in past tense. What is the tense in Hebrew? And the difficult question of the not quite parallel tenses in Hebrew and English.
Right. Okay, so let's see how he does it. I'm looking back and forth to the Hebrew. He says, Ani shachavti v'ishana. I slept and v'ishana, and I will sleep. Lie down. I lay down. Okay. So all right, for grammar people.
The Mitsuda has it in, the first verse is past tense. And then it should.
Read the Mitsuda. Read it out loud. It's hard for me to.
I lay down and I slept. And then I awoke. So I lay down and I slept. He says, I lie down and I sleep.
Yeah. So.
Hebrew.
So here's the thing, and this is really an interesting, this is not the perfect example of it, but I'm going to talk about it. There are other simpler, Ben, do you want to comment on this piece of it before, anybody else want to comment on this, and then I'll respond? Harold, why don't we open up to anything?
I actually have a question on this.
Excuse me?
I actually have a question on this.
Okay, so let me hear everything about this particular thing, and then I'll respond.
I'm a little confused in 6. About where the et nachta is. If you would read it in straight Hebrew, it would be I slept, I lay down and slept. I woke up because God sustained me. So hakitzoti would be part of the second phrase, but because of that nachta, it shows as the part of the first phrase, and it doesn't, it's not logical.
So hold on, let me just, again, I have to open up a different book. Yep.
And I can't see that.
And that's why, and Ben, to that issue, and I'll get to Marcia's, that's why, that's a very interesting point, because that's why it's often written, this is an example where there's even controversy about the things, when we say we know what the Trump marks are, that's a tradition. Not everybody agrees with all of those, right? So I'm looking at a translation, for instance, the Richard Levy, well, we're going to look at in a second. Richard Levy puts the Heki on the second line, but the Etnach is there. And that's why you see in his translation, he puts a comma after I awake.
Right, but that comma after I awake is very awkward.
It is, but he's reflecting the awkwardness of the Etnachta, exactly what you've picked up on. He's not resolving it, in other words. He wants to make sure you see in the English the awkwardness that, Ben, you're picking up as a Hebrew speaker. He doesn't have the resolution for it. He's saying it is awkward, that he's saying, I lie down and I sleep, period. He's saying to indicate his understanding. I awake, comma, which is the etnachta, more of a comma than a semicolon, for the Lord has sustained me.
Okay.
But you're right, this is awkward. There's no easy resolution to it. And what Alter wants you to feel is the awkwardness in the English also. Do you know what I mean? Like he's not creating a translation that resolves it. He wants to reflect it. Now, here's the problem with biblical, not problem, let me say this differently. And again, I am not a multi-language speaker. So I've been told, do we have any Russian speakers? And I wonder if this is true in Bulgarian. Danya, do you speak Russian? Danya, who's on the phone. I've been told this is true in Russian also, but I am not a Russian speaker, that the tenses are not past, present, and future the way modern English, and I think most modern languages, again, I'm not going to say anything about anything else because I don't know languages, but Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, not modern Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, and I've been told Russian, but again, I don't know, don't have past, present, and future tenses. That's an imposition of our grammatical norms today. What Darina speaks Russian. Sorry, Darina. Is this true about Russian? I don't know if I've been told it's true, that it's not past, present, and future, it's perfect and imperfect tenses. So what that means by perfect and imperfect is a perfect tense is the tense in which the action is complete. And an imperfect tense is the action in which is when the action is not complete, which is a very different way of looking at the world than just past, present, and future. So in Hebrew, that's why they're translating it as, so the, Darina, am I correct about that, about Russian? That's kind of an ancillary thing, but I think somebody told me that's true about Russian.
Darina, I've unmuted you. Is this correct about Russian, that there isn't simple past, present, and future?
Not exactly. It's two separate things. They have tenses which are just simple present, past, and future. But apart from that, they have aspect, and that's perfect versus imperfect.
Okay. So what this means is that perfect versus imperfect, and it'd be interesting to know if older Russian, but whatever, that's another question. And so perfect would mean it's over with. Like I went to the store. It's over with. But I am going to the store is imperfect. I go to the store is imperfect. I will go to the store is imperfect. It's not over with. So in biblical Hebrew, that's why translation's a little bit, and people who want the past, present, future, it's a little different than that if you really start to understand. So I lie down and I sleep. So the Hebrew, Shachavti v'ishana, which is an interesting, That's not how I would decline the word for I will sleep. A modern Hebrew speaker, how would you say I will sleep in Hebrew?
Ishan.
What? Ishan. Yeah, this is a strange word.
But this is in the past. Ishana is I slept.
Right, but it's with the vav, which makes it, which
And
has,
I lay down and I slept.
that's how you would translate it as a modern Hebrew speaker.
Yes.
So the reason it's complicated for biblical Hebrew is that, so when the vav is before the verb in biblical Hebrew, it's a little more complicated than this, and maybe we'll get deeper and deeper as we go through the Psalms, and I don't want to overwhelm people. But basically, the simplest way to say it is when the vav appears before the verb in biblical Hebrew, it reverses the tense. So it goes from past to future, or more exactly from perfect to imperfect. So, for instance, the very famous, I'll give you all something, those of you who are Hebrew speakers, you'll know. If I said to you, modern Hebrew speakers, this phrase, Vayomer, what does that mean? How would you translate Vayomer? Ben? Don't be clever with me. Just do don't try to outthink me.
Always a difficulty with it.
Okay.
Because it's supposed to be in the past, but it's in the future.
Well, okay. See, you're being clever, Ben. Just tell me how your modern Hebrew speaking ears would translate Vayomer.
And he said.
No, Vayomer, Yomer, you would say is said? No, just.
When I read it, I have difficulty with it. I don't hear it in the spoken language.
Okay.
And he
Right.
says,
And he will say, right? Vayomer, and he will say, with right. I mean, I know it's not. It's a very archaic word. So that's a bad example. But every verse in the Bible that starts with Vayomer and he will say doesn't mean and he will say. That vav takes the future tense or the imperfect tense, and by a miracle magic wand of a grammatical magic wand, it changes the tense. So it changes what looks like a future tense verb or an imperfect tense verb into a past. It's like a magic wand. It says, whoop, you're now past tense. And that's why we English speakers, we immediately see, and he said, and he's Vayidaber Adonai, and he said, but it's not past tense if you took the vav away. That vav has the power of changing the tense.
Rabbi.
It's a biblical grammatical convention.
Rabbi,
Yes, Bubala.
not to cut this short, but did we want to look at the other translations while we have them up here today?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's look at the next one.
Which one do you want to look at next?
Let's look at Levi next.
Okay, hold on, let me get Levi. All right, hold on. Here we are, Levi.
Right, so this is Levi, who's a rabbi, and okay, so rabbi. So now notice the way he's done both the Hebrew and the English. The Hebrew, he's divided up the phrases of the parallelism, and he's but he doesn't, yeah. So in English, this is what I want to point out a few things in his translation. So a Psalm of David, he rejects Alter's thing, and he goes back to what's the traditional, a Psalm of David. Now I like what he did here in the English of the verse, the next verse. When he fled from the face of Absalom, which is an interesting way because literally mifnei or mipnei means face of, but we don't usually translate it quite literally. But then what I love about his translation is the comma, his son. And what he does by doing that, he brings out into the English what I think you hear in the Hebrew is the emphasis on the relationship. As I said, what's the trauma of this? It's not that he's running away from somebody. In the ancient world, people were running away from enemies all the time. The power of this verse is that the person he's running away from is his own son. So he here too also repeats the word many. So look for that, you see. He, however, includes the word Selah in verse 3 as part of the verse and sees the word Selah as something that the speaker actually would say, kind of like, you know, the amen or an emphatic. He doesn't see it as a separate notation of some kind. Ve'ata, but you, the comma there, I like very much because, but you, Adonai, and the you is capitalized. You are a shield for me. And again, this emphasis of speaking directly to God, I think he does beautifully in this. And then my voice cries out to Adonai. Now that's different, and it's interesting to compare. He doesn't say what Alter did. I don't know how we could do these synoptically. Maybe one day we'll figure that out. Now, what's interesting about looking at verse 6, going back to what Marcia and Ben brought up, some people believe that this verse is the source of that prayer that Christians typically say, now I lay me down to sleep. And he is putting that translation there to emphasize, now it's, now I lay me down to sleep. He's using a phrase which any English speaker from the English-speaking world, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, or Christian, would recognize it as a language of prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep. So he is avoiding all of some of the issues that we talked about in order to bring this prayer. And then I will awake, for Adonai uphold me. Lo ira, I will not fear the thousands. Interesting translation. Remember, we had myriads of the other ones who have set themselves against me. Arise, Adonai, exclamation mark. And there you see the psik in verse 8 in the Hebrew. Deliver me, my God, capital G, and he will use the word God for Elohim or Elohai, and Adonai for the Yud He Vav He. Deliverance, Hoshea, not rescue, but deliverance. Your blessing is on your people. Fantastic. Okay, do we have time to look at Fisher?
We do. Hold on, let me pull it up. Okay. Whoops. Hold on. Wait a second. While I get this back up, there was a question from Yael about whether the Yud He Vav He has anything to do with the verb to be in all of its various different forms.
Excellent, excellent question. Nobody knows for sure, but we think so. In fact, in the book of Genesis, where we first encounter God describing God's self, God says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which means from the Hebrew verb to be, I will be who I will be. And so many people think the Yud He Vav He is related to that self-identity. We don't know for sure, you know, but there's a lot written about that. And it's a very interesting question, but I love the God's self-definition of being Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Talk about a Buddhist definition, right? I will be what I will be, or maybe I will be what you need me to be. I'm not sure. But there's a lot written about Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Or Jerry Herman's I am what I am. Absolutely. Wow, I never made that connection. Okay, this is Norman Fisher. We're going to look at these maybe synoptically on Monday a little bit, but this is an introduction. Now, if you have the original in front of you, but look at how the fantastic and interesting, now this is, he's not, as I said, Fisher is not interested in translating. He's not interested in giving us insight into a Hebrew word. He's interested in understanding what this psalm would mean for him to say it in a deeply religious way. So, how many are my tormentors? How many rise up against me? How many say of me, there is no hope for him? But do you see, by using that word many 3 times, he is achieving that rhythm that was in the Hebrew. And there's no way, I find this such a moving, because I think he's capturing the feeling of being attacked, of being oppressed, of being crushed, of despair. And then how many say of me, what are the attackers saying? And here he's translating, or he's taking the reference to God can't even save him to there is no hope for him. But you, no capital Y, you, the power in the universe, the force for which I owe my life, you are a shield around me, a shield of brilliant light, so I hold my head high. When with my voice I call out to you, and your silent comfort rolls down from the holy mountain. And when I lie down to sleep, you contain me, and I rise up again. I am not afraid of the threatening thousands. Rise up and embrace me. Shatter the jaws, break the teeth of my torment, that no twisted words can be formed in its mouth. Salvation flows from you, and blessings rain down on our people. on your people. All right, so I think we'll end there and just ask for any quick comments or questions, and we'll go back to these translations on Monday.
So we had a question here from Marcia, another one. Marcia did what we suggested, and she went and she looked at the Wikipedia article. And we should be careful what we tell people to do, because she said, hey, the Wikipedia article says that maybe there are more than 150 Psalms.
Okay, that's too long to approach right now, but let's hold on to that. That's
question.
excellent.
All right, let's see.
There are only 150 Psalms in the Jewish tradition, but there's a longer question that will take some time. I'm going to write that down.
Okay.
Good for you for doing your homework.
Simon or Sherry, one of you has I unmuted you already.
Okay. The question of Salah. If it were indeed a musical notation, I noticed that it sort of created the sections of the psalm that it really, demarked them. And as a musician, if I were composing something, I would make that a rest.
Interesting.
To demark the.
It's going to be fun to study these psalms with so many musicians in the group, because we're going to come across Selah a bunch, and let's keep looking at that. And maybe we need to do more research about Selah itself, which I've never studied in depth, but this is inspiring me to do more research about that.
All right.
And you can really see that in altars, and you see how different it is that Richard Levy just puts it right in. It doesn't look like a musical notation there. It's something like, slap me 5 or yes, or there's something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Benjamin, you have your hand up. Unmute you. You're unmuted.
Okay. Just to give a magnitude to the word Rabim, many, that we have in different translation. In Levavav, which is really the word in the text, means 10,000. Levavot is many 10,000s, which gives you a magnitude of what he's trying to convey.
And which is why you see some of the translations literally use the word thousands.
Yeah, it's many thousands.
Yeah.
And myriad comes from the Greek from murios, which also means 10,000 or many. I think that in this time, there was, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. They would count to a certain point, and then it was like just a lot. It was not literally 10,000, but the word for 10,000 and the word for many are the same thing.
Interesting. I learned that.
Shep.
So that clearly is what this word is.
Shep, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Okay. I actually have a question. Can't we figure out what Selah means by looking at its shoresh?
No, it's not that simple. But we will spend more time, because the shoresh can only give us a range of possibilities, or it's really about context. Since there's nobody alive who's using the word Selah in their natural speech, the only way we know what a word means is we ask people, what do you mean when you use the word blah? That's why a dictionary changes all the time, because the dictionary is watching how words are actually used in speech, not how somebody says it should be used in speech. And believe me, the French folks and Hebrew purists, both countries have academies to write words that they want people to use. And guess what? People don't necessarily use the words that the academy says, this is the word you should be using. The academy in Hebrew in Israel is always making up words because they don't want English words to be used. And guess what? If an Israeli is using an English word for something, it's now a modern Hebrew word. I mean, that's how language develops.
Spanish has the same kind of
Every
academy.
language is like that. It's
but
what language? Yeah.
All right,
But
we are
Hebrew
now.
succeeded with the native Hebrew word for computer. They don't use the word computer. They have a Hebrew word for it.
Right.
I
Shep,
don't know what it is. It's a real Hebrew word, though.
thank you for that. And we're at 10:45, so may we go to Julia to sing us out and leave this
And
until
hold-
Monday.
Yes, and I've written down a couple of these questions, and we'll continue. That's the joy of this class. We're not running out of time anytime soon.
All right, here we are.
Lo ida meri vevot amasher saviv shatu alai alai. Lo ida meri vevot amasher saviv shatu alai alai. Kuma Hashem vehoshieni. Kuma Hashem vehoshieni. Lo ira merivivot am asher saviv shatu alai alai. Lo ira merivivot am asher saviv shatu alai.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
everybody,
much.
so much. The room will stay open for a few minutes, but wonderful to study with everybody. Have a good Shabbos. We have services Friday night. And then also tonight, Rabbi Moskowitz is also teaching his 4 o'clock class on Pirkei Avos. And then he's teaching a class on graceful masculinity tonight. That'll be a weekly class. Tomorrow, Deborah Megdal is doing the 3 o'clock session for people, just a kind of a support group, studies text. 6:30 service, and then on Shabbat morning, we're not having a regular service, but Rabbi Rapport is going to be teaching a Torah study at 10 a.m. Okay, Shabbat Shalom. See everybody at Shul tomorrow night.
Shabbat Shalom.